After a promising freshman campaign by Deion Sanders, Florida State was more than excited to have him back as the full-time starter. And after becoming the full-time starter at Florida State, Deion Sanders would no longer be in charge of kick return duties, something that he was an All-American at last season. You can tell that Deion was a little bit frustrated by that decision, but he understood that he needs to be at 100% to make an impact, and plays like that just weren't going to cut it. Florida State was taking on Oklahoma State, who they had just taken on in the bowl game last season, so they were very familiar with them, and going into the fourth quarter, Florida State held on to a very small lead. Oklahoma State was attacking Deion, but Florida State will be able to hold him to a field goal, so it was a tied game late in the fourth. Florida State needed their offense to play better than they did last season, and on this 3rd and 4, they'd be able to convert it, putting them in a position to go ahead and score the game-winning touchdown. That's exactly what they would do with less than 6 seconds to go in the game. And after such a thriller in the opening game of the season, Florida State had a little bit of a rest week against an FCS opponent. At least that's what it was supposed to be on paper, but Florida State in the second quarter had yet to put up any points. Thankfully, the Florida State defense was holding it down, and they would hold the FCS opponent to just 3 points through the first half. By the end of the third quarter, Florida State would finally put a touchdown on the board, taking the lead, and Deion was having his bounce back game against this lesser opponent after struggling against Oklahoma State. He was making plays in the backfield and in the passing game. I mean, that was until he got absolutely stiff-armed to hell on this play. But thankfully, the pursuit of the Florida State defense was too good. You can tell that Deion definitely took that one personally, and on this 3rd and 5, he'd make an incredible play on the ball, intercepting it for his first of the season. Florida State's offense would go ahead and put another touchdown on the board in the fourth quarter, and on this 4th and inches, this stop would seal the game completely. Prime time was officially back. Deion was already technically a starter, but he was fighting for the #1 corner spot on his team. And if you remember last season, this man could not win a position battle to save his life. But all of a sudden this season, he turned it up and he would win the first and only position battle he needed to. Florida State would then take on Pitt at home in the rain, and Deion was getting tried from the jump. It was clear that Pitt really didn't respect Deion as a corner yet, because they saw how Oklahoma State was exposing him in week 1. But Deion showed him that he was going to hold his own. Pitt would try to make this one manageable in the third quarter with this touchdown, but Florida State would just go ahead and answer right back with another one of their own in the fourth. And after Pitt tried Deion all day, he would finally put his stamp on college football. He would intercept this pass and take it to the crib for his first pick 6 of his career. My dog got up and started posing for the cameraman right there. But Florida State couldn't celebrate their win against Pitt for long, because they had number 6 Clemson coming to town. And this game had a wild start with DJ pitching the ball, but a Florida State defender would catch it instead. Florida State put a field goal up on the board as a result of that play, but Deion started struggling a little bit, and he had to get his mojo back on this 3rd and 2, where he'd make an incredible stop. Both teams were only able to put field goals up on the board, and by the second quarter, it was 6-3 with Clemson trying to drive down before the half. And typically, you don't see covered corners making a lot of tackles, but this man Deion was all over the field and actually laid the boom on Antonio Williams on that play. And the Florida State secondary was doing a great job of forcing extremely hard throws for DJ. If Clemson wanted to beat Florida State, they were going to have to throw perfect passes. And one thing started to become very evident. Deion Sanders was the best player on this defense, and he was making it known week after week. If Maryland knew better, they would do better, because I don't know why they tried Deion here. Late into the second quarter, Maryland had yet to put any points up on the board, and just as Florida State was trying to go ahead and score a touchdown before the half, Maryland's defense would force this fumble and they'd scoop it up, taking it past the 40-yard line. And with all the momentum on Maryland's side, they would go ahead and take a shot deep 2 plays later. They knew not to try Deion, so they took a shot against the corner opposite of him, and they would get the touchdown. By the middle of the third quarter, they found themselves tied at 10-10, and I can't believe this man made this grab in front of Deion. And nah, that shit was actually crazy disrespectful. Florida State found themselves down by 3 late in the fourth quarter, and they needed a miracle. But unfortunately, they would throw this interception, ending their chances of a perfect season. Thankfully, they had a great opportunity the very next week against number 2 Miami, their rival. After losing to the Canes last season, Deion wanted to try to get this dub bad, but he was low-key getting exposed out there, and Florida State decided to try and go for the touchdown just before the half instead of kicking the field goal. And Miami had no remorse. In the second half, they started to find their stride, and after they scored here in the fourth quarter, they had a chance to put this game away late in the fourth, and they would score again on another touchdown. After dropping 2 straight games, Florida State was taking on NC State, who had a running back that was running harder than the zombies in I Am Legend. And after Deion struggled in those last 2 games, he needed to turn it back up, and that's what he would do, as he would intercept this pass, leading to Florida State's first points of the game. And I'm telling you, this NC State running back was different. He was able to take them down single-handedly to kick a field goal, but Florida State and the offense would go ahead and put a touchdown on the board to tie it up. Jordan Travis wouldn't be able to find anyone on this throw, so he would go ahead and tuck it and run it in for the touchdown. NC State was in prime position to go ahead and score score to put this game into OT, but the Florida State defense would turn up. And it looked like Florida State was back on track, but they had to travel to App State, whose stadium looked like a bumblebee hive. But after the two teams went back and forth in the first quarter, Florida State would go ahead and score in the second quarter to take the lead. And on the very next play, the Florida State defense would step up big and intercept this pass to take it to the crib. Just like that, Florida State would score 21 unanswered, but my man Deion will get absolutely routed up here on this comeback just before the half, and App State would capitalize. But thankfully, the Florida State offense just would never let App State catch up completely. The BC Eagles were not a very good team, but that's exactly why they were the perfect matchup for Florida State. They were a team that had nothing to lose, and they were going to play balls to the walls. BC needed to win 4 straight games to become bowl eligible, and after Florida State had already become bowl eligible last week, at this point they were trying to play for a better bowl game. Zay Flowers was the best player on this BC team, but he could not get away from Deion. BC was looking for a touchdown right before the half to swing all the momentum, but the Florida State defense would hold. And late in the third quarter, BC had the ball again on 1st and 10, and instead of playing it safe, they would try to force it to Zay Flowers, but Deion would play it perfectly and intercept it. That interception would lead directly to a touchdown, and in the fourth quarter, Florida State would put this game away. And just for good measure, the Florida State defense would completely demoralize BC with this interception on the sideline. And just like that, Florida State would get their 7th win of the season, and more importantly, we could see that Deion could go against the top receivers in the country and shut shit down. Zay Flowers finished the game with barely any catches, and it looked like Deion was on his way to being an All-American. If Deion Sanders was going to play the way he's been playing all season, there was a good chance he was going to be an All-American. And even though Florida State had zero chance of winning the national championship this year or even the ACC championship, they were building some great chemistry for the future. But they couldn't take this 5-4 Syracuse team lightly because they were one win away from becoming bowl eligible, and they wanted to do it against Florida State. And perfect passes like this one were going to give them a great chance of pulling off the upset. And if this Syracuse team was any other team in the country, I know that would have been a targeting call. But they let that shit slide, and the QB was trying to get his lick back against Deion and try to truck him, but instead he would fumble the ball. Syracuse would pick up the fumble, and somehow this man Deion had enough time to fall on the ground twice and still make the tackle. I'm not gonna even lie, I was texting before this play, and before I knew it, I looked up and they threw this shit over Deion's head. Nah, I really felt like a piece of shit because this was not on Deion or on Florida State, but they was gonna face the repercussions because of it. Syracuse would go on to score the go-ahead touchdown with just over a minute left in the game, and you would not believe the final plays of this game. The Syracuse QB would fumble it, and the ball would bounce all the way into the end zone and he'd recover. After Florida State's loss last week to Syracuse, they needed to tighten up, and even though I may have played a hand in that loss, they should not have been tied at 10 with Syracuse in the fourth quarter anyways. And it was starting to look like Wake Forest was going to give them a run for their money as well because they were throwing some perfect passes. Florida State would score this touchdown in the third quarter to take the lead, but by the fourth quarter, it was just a 4-point game, and Wake Forest would go ahead and try Deion deep on this post. Deion would do a great job with the hand fighting and break it up, and later on in the drive, Florida State would intercept it here, killing the momentum of Wake Forest. It was still a one-possession game though, so Florida State's offense needed to get something going to try and pull away, and the Florida State QB had legs for days. He's a runner, he's a track star. Boy was the tuck it and run it king. But this game was far from over. With just over a minute left, Wake Forest would convert this 4th and 6 from their own territory, and Deion would not have great eye discipline on this play and will get caught lacking, and the ball would go right over his head. But it was just too little too late as there wasn't enough time in the game, and Florida State would go ahead and escape this one with the win. This was one of the biggest games of the year. Florida State. Both teams were ranked in the top 25, and they both had really good rosters. After Florida State went and scored that touchdown early in the first, Florida was driving all the way down, but Deion took matters in his own hands. My man ran the corner blitz to perfection, killing Florida's drive, and eventually they would have to just settle for a field goal. On 3rd and 6, the Florida State defense was running cover 2, and Florida would hit the soft spot in the zone perfectly. And Deion was making the Florida QB his bitch because he was laying his ass out all game. Florida bounced back from that, and they would go ahead and score this touchdown and take the lead. And in the fourth quarter, on a 3rd and 26, Florida State needed something magical to happen. They'd be able to convert the improbable 3rd down, and on 3rd and goal, the offense would get it done and get the touchdown on the board. With one last chance left in the game, Florida had a Hail Mary to win it, but Deion will be right there to break it up. This win against in-state rival Florida was huge because after losing to Miami earlier in the season, they didn't want to go down as the worst Power 5 team in Florida. Florida State was headed to the bowl game with a chance to finish the season with 10 wins. The Cheez-It Bowl started with a ballsy fake punt by Iowa State, and they'd actually be able to convert. The gamble would pay off because eventually Iowa State would go ahead and put a touchdown on the board to take the lead before half. But Florida State would make a gamble of their own on 4th and 10. Instead of trying for the long field goal, would throw this long touchdown strike. Believe it or not, but Iowa State's actually a 99 overall team in this game. But Florida State just simply had better athletes. The Florida State offense would put this touchdown on the board to go up 2 possessions, and the Florida State defense just needed to hold. By the time the 4th quarter came around, it was still 17-7, and Iowa State needed to convert on this 4th and 15. But Florida State's safety would make an incredible play on the ball. But this game was just getting good because Iowa State would take this deep shot on 3rd and 2 and would actually complete it for the touchdown. And after burning all 3 of their timeouts, Iowa State would get the ball back. And this incredible pass and catch would put them closer to a field goal to send this game to OT. But big time players make big time plays in big time games, and Deion Sanders would intercept this pass and take it all the way. The interception that would set him up to be the favorite to win the Jim Thorpe next season as a junior.